On November 19, 1274, samurai warrior Takazaki Suenaga charged alone toward 30,000 Mongol invaders on Hakata Bay beach, screaming his ancestral lineage and demanding single combat according to ancient tradition. The Mongols responded by shooting him with poisoned arrows, detonating an explosive bomb that killed his horse, and having 40 men attack him simultaneously while laughing at his challenge. This was the moment Japan discovered that their way of warfare, perfected over centuries of ritualized combat, was useless against an enemy that had conquered from Poland to Korea. Within 7 years, these same samurai would transform their entire military system, build the longest defensive wall in medieval Asia, and stop the largest invasion fleet in history. This is how 10,000 Japanese warriors defeated Kublai Khan's 140,000 soldiers and 4,400 ships, creating the legend of the kamikaze and proving that the Mongol Empire, which had never lost a conquest, could be beaten. By 1274, the Mongol Empire had conquered more territory than Rome at its height, crushing every military force from European knights to Chinese armies to Islamic cavalry. Their tactical system was perfection. Mounted archers who could fire 12 arrows per minute while galloping, Chinese siege engineers with catapults and explosive bombs, Korean naval expertise with advanced ships, and most importantly, the ability to adapt and absorb enemy tactics instantly. They had never failed to conquer a targeted nation. Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, ruled from Beijing over the largest land empire in human history. When he turned his eyes toward Japan, which he called the land of the rising sun that must submit to the son of heaven, he brought everything: Mongol cavalry, Chinese infantry, Korean sailors, and new weapons the Japanese had never imagined. The invasion force was organized with ruthless efficiency that had crushed 40 nations before. The samurai of 1274 were warriors trapped in ritual. Battle began with arrow exchanges where warriors announced their names and lineage, challenged worthy opponents to single combat, and fought elaborate duels while armies watched. Victory was measured in heads taken from worthy opponents, not strategic objectives. They wore elaborate armor designed to look impressive, with huge shoulder plates and decorative helmets that made quick movement difficult. Their tactics hadn't evolved in centuries because they hadn't needed to, fighting other samurai who followed the same rules. The Hojo clan, which ruled Japan as regents, could field perhaps 10,000 trained samurai across all of Kyushu, Japan's southern island where any invasion would land. These warriors were masters of sword, bow, and horse, but they were about to face enemies who used gunpowder, fought in coordinated units, and considered honor a weakness to exploit. The morning of November 19, 1274, began with Japanese messenger boats approaching the Mongol fleet of 900 ships to formally declare the battle's commencement according to tradition. The Mongols sank them immediately with flaming arrows and catapult stones. As the invasion force landed at Hakata Bay, samurai rode down to the beach in small groups, each seeking personal glory. They fired ceremonial humming bulb arrows to announce their attack, called out their genealogies, and challenged Mongols to combat. The Mongols responded with drum signals that coordinated 1,000-man units to surround and slaughter individual samurai. The technological gap was shocking. Mongol tetsuhao, iron bombs, exploded with noise that terrified horses. Their arrows were poisoned with feces and poison, and their soldiers fought in disciplined formations using flags and drums for communication. By noon, the samurai were in full retreat, having never faced an enemy that treated war as extermination rather than honor contest. The Mongol assault was a masterclass in combined arms tactics that the samurai had no framework to understand. Mongol drums didn't just coordinate, they communicated complex commands across the battlefield. Different rhythms meant advance, retreat, encircle, or change formation. Their armies moved like a single organism with thousands of parts. Light cavalry with composite bows stayed at distance, darkening the sky with arrows. When samurai charged, they retreated, drawing them into kill zones where Chinese crossbowmen waited. Heavy cavalry with lances hit samurai who were already wounded by arrows. Infantry with shields and spears held positions while cavalry maneuvered. Most terrifying were the Chinese thunder crash bombs, ceramic shells filled with gunpowder and metal shrapnel that exploded on impact. Samurai armor, designed for swords and arrows, offered no protection against concussive force and flying metal fragments. As November 19th turned to evening, the surviving samurai conducted a fighting retreat toward Dazaifu, the ancient administrative capital of Kyushu, located 15 kilometers inland. Small groups of warriors sacrificed themselves holding bridges and mountain passes, buying time for the main force to escape. Takazaki Suenaga, despite 3 arrow wounds and burns from bomb explosions, led his retainers in repeated charges to slow Mongol pursuit. Shimazu Hisatsune held a bridge with 20 men against hundreds, dying when Mongol engineers destroyed the bridge with explosives. The retreat wasn't cowardice, but strategic necessity. The samurai needed to regroup and adapt. As night fell, the Mongols surprisingly didn't pursue into the mountains. Instead, they returned to their ships, perhaps wary of fighting in unknown terrain at night. This decision would prove fatal. That night, as Mongol forces celebrated their easy victory on their ships, weather turned apocalyptic. What started as rain became a massive storm with winds that Japanese chronicles described as divine breath of the gods. Modern meteorologists identify it as probably a November typhoon, rare but not impossible. Mongol ships, designed for rivers and coastal waters, were packed too closely in Hakata Bay. As winds exceeded 150 kilometers per hour, ships smashed into each other. Korean sailors, forced to serve the Mongols, had warned about November storms, but Mongol commanders ignored them. By dawn, over 200 ships were sunk, 13,000 soldiers were dead, and the surviving fleet was fleeing toward Korea. The samurai, preparing for desperate last stands in mountain fortresses, instead found Hakata Bay filled with corpses and shipwrecks. The invasion was over in one night, but every Japanese leader knew the Mongols would return. Between 1274 and 1281, Japan underwent the most rapid military transformation in its history. The Hojo Regency, particularly Hojo Tokimune, understood that divine wind wouldn't save them twice. They ordered construction of the Genko Borui, a stone defensive wall running 20 kilometers along Hakata Bay, standing 3 meters high with a fighting platform behind it. But the real revolution was tactical. Samurai were forced to abandon individual combat for group tactics. Training camps taught coordinated movements, shield walls, and concentrated archery. They studied captured Mongol weapons, attempting to recreate gunpowder bombs. Sword techniques evolved from dueling to close-quarters group combat. Most importantly, they developed night warfare tactics, something traditionally considered dishonorable but necessary against Mongols. The transformation was cultural trauma. Imagine medieval knights being forced to abandon chivalry for modern warfare in just 7 years. Japan's isolation became an intelligence advantage as they intercepted every Mongol embassy demanding surrender. In 1275, 5 Mongol envoys arrived. Rather than negotiating, Hojo Tokimune had them taken to Kamakura, interrogated for months about Mongol tactics and weapons, then publicly beheaded. Their heads were displayed as a message: Japan would never surrender. Meanwhile, Japanese spies, often Buddhist monks who could travel as pilgrims, infiltrated the mainland. They reported on Mongol preparations in Korea, where massive shipyards were building invasion fleets. They learned about Mongol command structures, signal systems, and most importantly, tensions between Mongol commanders and their Chinese and Korean conscripts. By 1280, Japan knew invasion was imminent and had detailed intelligence on enemy forces. The Mongols, conversely, knew almost nothing about Japanese preparations, believing they would face the same disorganized resistance as 1274. In spring 1281, Kublai Khan assembled the largest naval invasion force in history until D-Day. 2 fleets would converge on Japan: the Eastern Route Army from Korea, with 40,000 Mongol and Korean troops and 900 ships, and the Southern Route Army from China, with 100,000 Chinese soldiers in 3,500 ships. The combined force of 140,000 troops was supported by Korean sailors, Chinese engineers with advanced catapults, Muslim artillery specialists with improved bombs, and even European siege engineers captured in Eastern Europe. The fleet carried horses for 15,000 cavalry, siege equipment to destroy walls, and enough supplies for a year-long campaign. Kublai Khan appointed Arakan, a veteran of European campaigns, as supreme commander. The plan was simple. Overwhelming force would crush any resistance. Japan had perhaps 10,000 samurai and whatever peasant conscripts they could gather. On paper, it was impossible odds. On June 21, 1281, the Eastern Route Army arrived at Hakata Bay to find a 3-meter stone wall where open beach had been. The Genko Borui stretched along the entire landing area, with samurai positioned behind it, and small forts every few hundred meters. When Mongol ships approached to land troops, they faced concentrated arrow fire from elevated positions. The wall prevented cavalry charges and turned the beach into a kill zone. Mongol commanders tried landing at several points, but each attempt met the same coordinated defense. Japanese defenders used large wooden shields positioned on the wall to protect against Mongol arrows, while their own archers fired through slots. For the first time, the technological advantage was neutralized. Mongol bombs were less effective against stone fortifications, and their cavalry was useless without space to maneuver. After losing 3,000 men in futile landing attempts, the Mongols retreated to Shikanoshima Island to wait for the Southern Route Army. While Mongols controlled the sea by day, samurai owned the night. Small teams of warriors would swim out to anchored ships, climb aboard silently, kill sentries, set fires, and escape before alarms were raised. Kusano Jiro led the most famous raid, taking 30 samurai to board the Mongol command ship. They killed dozens of officers before escaping, though Kusano died covering their retreat. Other samurai used small, fast boats to approach larger ships, throwing grappling hooks and climbing aboard with swords and torches. The psychological impact was devastating. Mongol soldiers couldn't sleep, constantly watching for raiders. Ships had to post double guards, exhausting their troops. Some nights, samurai would simply bang drums and blow horns from boats, keeping entire fleets awake without attacking. By July, Mongol forces were exhausted, demoralized, and hadn't even begun the real invasion. The night raids killed perhaps 1,000 Mongols, but psychologically impacted thousands more. In late July, the Southern Route Army finally arrived, and the combined fleet moved to Takashima Island to prepare the final assault. On August 12th, a massive naval battle erupted when Japanese small boats attacked the anchored fleet. The samurai had learned from 1274. They used fire arrows, burning boats sent into enemy formations, and hit-and-run tactics that prevented Mongol numerical superiority from being decisive. The battle raged for 2 days with neither side gaining clear advantage. Mongol catapults sank Japanese boats, but samurai swimmers attached burning materials to Mongol ship rudders, leaving them unable to maneuver. The confined waters around Takashima prevented the Mongol fleet from using its size effectively. Ships collided, friendly fire incidents occurred, and command coordination broke down. As August 14th dawned, both fleets were bloodied but intact. Then the weather began to change, with morning scouts reporting an approaching storm. On August 15, 1281, a typhoon of unprecedented power struck the Mongol fleet anchored at Takashima. This wasn't like 1274's storm. This was a full Category 4 typhoon, with winds exceeding 200 kilometers per hour. The 4,400 ships, many linked together for stability, became a death trap. Ships smashed into each other, masts fell like spears crushing men below, and anchor chains snapped like threads. Chinese ships, hastily built and undermanned, disintegrated first. Their crews, many of them farmers conscripted into naval service, had no chance. Korean ships, built stronger, lasted longer but were eventually overwhelmed. Men who jumped overboard were pulled under by armor or crushed between colliding vessels. The Japanese watched from shore as the entire invasion force was destroyed in 2 days. When the storm cleared on August 17th, Hakata Bay was a graveyard of wooden debris and bodies. Of 140,000 invaders, perhaps 30,000 survived, most on the northern ships that managed to flee. As thousands of Mongol, Chinese, and Korean survivors washed ashore or clung to wreckage, the samurai showed no mercy. Orders from Hojo Tokumune were explicit: no prisoners except for technical specialists who could provide intelligence. Samurai units systematically swept beaches, executing survivors with sword strikes to the neck. Peasants joined the killing with farm tools, revenge for the terror of invasion. Some Chinese soldiers tried to surrender, explaining they were forced conscripts, not willing invaders, but language barriers and blood fury prevented mercy. The Mongols, who had shown no quarter in their conquests, received none in their defeat. Japanese records claim 20,000 to 30,000 prisoners were executed in the week following the typhoon. Only a few hundred southern Chinese, valued for their engineering knowledge, were spared and enslaved. The beaches of Kyushu were lined with heads on pikes, a message to any future invaders. The destruction of the Japan invasion force traumatized the Mongol Empire in ways that transcended military loss. This was their first total defeat, not a tactical setback or strategic withdrawal, but complete annihilation. Kublai Khan lost face throughout his empire. Subject peoples from Korea to Persia heard that the invincible Mongols could be beaten. The financial cost was staggering. Building the fleet had nearly bankrupted the Chinese treasury. The human cost was worse. Entire Korean villages had no men left, all conscripted as sailors and drowned. Chinese provinces rebelled when news arrived that their forced conscripts had died for nothing. Kublai Khan ordered a third invasion prepared, but his advisors secretly sabotaged preparations, knowing it was impossible. The psychological scar never healed. Mongol expansion, which had seemed infinite, stopped. Japan became kamikaze-protected land in Mongol memory, a place where even the heavens fought against them. Victory transformed samurai warfare permanently. The individualistic warrior culture that had defined them for centuries was dead, replaced by pragmatic military professionalism. Group tactics became standard. Night warfare, once dishonorable, became acceptable. Coastal defense became a specialized discipline with manuals written about fortification design and naval combat. Samurai began studying foreign weapons and tactics systematically. The use of lower-class warriors, ashigaru foot soldiers, increased dramatically, as numbers had proven crucial. The psychological change was profound. Samurai had learned they could adapt. That tradition wasn't sacred if survival was at stake. This flexibility would define Japanese military culture for centuries. Ironically, defeating the Mongols by abandoning traditional samurai warfare validated the samurai class as Japan's essential defenders, strengthening their political position for the next 600 years. Victory nearly bankrupted Japan. The Hojo government had promised rewards to samurai who fought, but there was no conquered territory to distribute. Unlike domestic wars where winners took losers' lands, fighting Mongols yielded only destroyed equipment and wounded warriors. Samurai who had mortgaged estates to buy equipment demanded compensation. The government tried issuing debt relief edicts, but this crashed the economy. Temples that had prayed for victory demanded payment. The defensive walls needed maintenance. Coastal guards had to be maintained against future invasion. The economic strain contributed to the Hojo Regency's fall 50 years later. Many samurai families, despite heroic service, lost their lands to debt. The paradox was bitter. Japan saved its independence but couldn't afford victory. This economic crisis taught Japanese leaders that defensive wars, no matter how successful, were economically ruinous. The term kamikaze, divine wind, became central to Japanese identity. Shinto priests claimed their prayers had summoned the typhoons. Buddhist monks insisted their sutras had protected Japan. The imperial court, largely powerless politically, used divine intervention narratives to assert relevance. Within a generation, the historical reality, prepared defenses, tactical adaptation, and intelligent resistance was overshadowed by supernatural explanation. This served everyone's interests. Samurai didn't have to admit they'd needed divine help. Priests gained prestige, and the government avoided paying full military rewards by crediting gods instead of warriors. The mythology grew with each retelling until many Japanese genuinely believed heaven had chosen them as a divine nation. This belief would have profound consequences 660 years later when Japan again faced overwhelming odds and expected divine winds to save them. Beyond walls and storms, Japan won through superior intelligence. They knew when invasions would come, with what forces and Mongol intentions. Captured Chinese engineers revealed Mongol weapons before the second invasion. Korean defectors warned about fleet movements. Japanese spies in Korea reported shipbuilding progress. Meanwhile, Mongols knew almost nothing about Japanese preparations. They expected to face the same scattered resistance as 1274. The wall surprised them completely. They didn't know about samurai tactical reforms or night combat training. This intelligence gap proved decisive. Mongols prepared for the wrong war. Japan's isolation, usually a weakness, became strength when combined with aggressive intelligence gathering. The lesson was clear. Knowledge could defeat numbers. This emphasis on intelligence would become a permanent feature of Japanese military doctrine. Korea suffered most from the Mongol invasions despite being neither invader nor defender. Koreans built the ships under Mongol oppression, their forests stripped bare for timber. Korean sailors were forced to navigate the fleets, dying when storms struck. Korean soldiers conscripted into invasion forces faced samurai blades or drowned in typhoons. Entire Korean coastal regions were depopulated by conscription. After defeat, Mongols blamed Korean shipbuilders for weak vessels and executed supervisors. Korea gained nothing from Mongol victory or defeat. Either outcome meant continued oppression. Yet Korean maritime knowledge had been crucial for even reaching Japan. Their tragedy was enabling an invasion they opposed for masters they hated against an enemy who wasn't theirs. Perhaps 50,000 Koreans died in the two invasions. Their unwilling sacrifice ironically helped save Japan, as their deliberately poor ship construction contributed to fleet vulnerability. Despite victory, Japan gained invaluable military technology from the invasions. Captured Tetsuhou bombs were reverse-engineered, beginning Japan's experiments with gunpowder. Mongol signal systems using flags and drums were adapted for samurai use. Chinese siege equipment designs were studied and improved. Korean shipbuilding techniques, learned from captured vessels, advanced Japanese naval architecture. Even Mongol horse armor influenced samurai equipment design. The invasions forced Japan to look outward technologically while remaining politically isolated. This selective adoption, taking useful military innovations while rejecting political domination, would define Japanese strategy for centuries. When Portuguese firearms arrived 250 years later, Japan's precedent of rapid military adaptation was already established. The Mongol invasions, though defeated, had modernized Japanese warfare. After 1281, Japan developed sophisticated diplomatic strategies to prevent future invasions. They maintained ambiguous relationships with China, neither submitting nor directly challenging. Japanese pirates, Waiko, were unofficially encouraged to raid Chinese and Korean coasts, keeping potential enemies unstable. Buddhist temples maintained religious exchanges that provided intelligence without political commitment. Trade was carefully controlled to gain economic benefits without dependency. When Ming China overthrew the Mongols in 1368, Japan immediately sent congratulations but refused subordinate status. This diplomatic balancing act, engagement without submission, protected Japan for centuries. The invasions taught Japan that military victory meant nothing without diplomatic follow-through. Isolation became strategic choice rather than geographic accident. Kublai Khan's failure to conquer Japan contributed to the Yuan dynasty's eventual collapse. The invasion's cost prevented other military campaigns. Chinese resentment over wasted lives in Japan fueled rebellions. Mongol invincibility mythology was shattered. Within Kublai's court, the Japan failure created factions, those who wanted revenge versus those who considered Japan cursed. This indecision paralyzed Mongol expansion. When Kublai died in 1294, succession disputes were worsened by the Japan humiliation. The Yuan dynasty, which might have lasted centuries with continued military success, fell in 1368, just 87 years after failing at Japan. Chinese historians later argued that attempting to invade Japan was the Mongols' fatal strategic error, overextending their empire and breaking their aura of destiny. The samurai hadn't just saved Japan, they'd started the Mongol Empire's decline. Often overlooked were the Sohei, warrior monks who fought alongside samurai against the Mongols. These Buddhist warriors from temples like Enryakuji and Kofukuji brought unique capabilities. Naginata, glaive techniques effective against cavalry, coordinated fighting in large formations, and fanatical determination believing death in battle guaranteed paradise. At Hakata Bay, warrior monks held crucial sections of the wall, their naginata creating walls of spinning blades that Mongol cavalry couldn't penetrate. They also provided logistics. Temple networks supplied food, medical care, and intelligence across Kyushu. Most importantly, they maintained morale through religious certainty that Japan was divinely protected. While samurai fought for land and honor, warrior monks fought for cosmic significance. Their participation unified Japan's military and religious institutions against foreign threat. After victory, these warrior monks gained dangerous political power, eventually threatening the samurai government itself. The Mongol invasions forced Japan to confront a mathematical reality. 10,000 samurai, no matter how skilled, couldn't defend against 140,000 invaders. The solution was revolutionary for class-conscious Japan: arm the peasants. Ashigaru, literally light feet, were commoners given basic weapons and minimal training. At Hakata Bay, thousands of Ashigaru held the wall between samurai strongpoints, using long spears to prevent Mongol landings. They crewed the small boats in night raids, rowing while samurai fought. They maintained and supplied the defensive positions. This military democratization was supposed to be temporary, but the Ashigaru proved so effective, they became permanent. Within 2 centuries, Ashigaru would outnumber samurai in most armies. The Mongol invasions had forced Japan to discover what Europe learned at Courtrai: properly equipped commoners could fight effectively. This realization would eventually contribute to the samurai class's obsolescence. Preparing for and fighting the Mongol invasions devastated Kyushu's environment. Forests were clear-cut for defensive stakes and shipbuilding. The 20-kilometer wall required quarrying that scarred mountains. Farmland was converted to defensive positions. The battles and storms left Hakata Bay polluted with thousands of corpses and shipwreckage, causing disease outbreaks. Burned ships released toxic materials that killed marine life. Mass cremations after the battles created air pollution that chroniclers noted caused breathing problems. Agricultural production dropped as farmers were conscripted for defense work. Some environmental damage lasted decades. Deforestation caused erosion and flooding. Abandoned defensive positions became wasteland. The ecological cost of victory was a lesson in total war's true price. Japan saved its political independence but transformed its landscape. Some Kyushu forests never recovered their pre-invasion biodiversity. Beyond military success, Japan achieved something unique. They had broken the Mongol Empire's psychological dominance. Every other nation had either submitted or been destroyed. Japan did neither. This created a national mythology of exceptionalism that would persist for centuries. Samurai children grew up knowing their ancestors had defeated the world conquerors. This confidence manifested in aggressive foreign policy. Within decades, Japanese pirates were raiding China and Korea, reversing the invasion dynamic. When European powers arrived in the 1500s, Japan's reaction was confident resistance rather than submission, remembering they had defeated a greater threat. The psychological impact extended beyond Japan. Other Asian nations saw that Mongol defeat was possible. The invasions meant to demonstrate Mongol supremacy, instead proved their limitations. Japan had won not just military victory, but the war of minds. The supreme irony of the Mongol invasions was that they achieved the opposite of their intent. Instead of subjugating Japan, they unified it. Instead of demonstrating Mongol superiority, they proved Japanese resilience. Instead of expanding the empire, they began its contraction. Instead of weakening samurai power, they legitimized it for 6 more centuries. The invasions forced military modernization that made Japan stronger. They created national identity that hadn't existed before. They developed defensive expertise that would protect Japan until 1945. Most ironically, the divine winds that saved Japan became a curse. The kamikaze mythology would lead Japan to expect miraculous salvation in future wars, contributing to catastrophic decisions in World War II. The Mongols had given Japan its greatest victory and planted seeds of its eventual greatest defeat. The Mongol invasions of Japan came down to crucial numbers that defined history. 10,000 samurai had stopped 140,000 invaders, a 14.1 disadvantage overcome. 4,400 ships had been destroyed, the largest naval loss until modern times. 20 kilometers of wall had held against empire. 2 typhoons in 7 years had struck at perfect moments. astronomical odds that still fuel divine intervention theories. 100,000 invaders had died for nothing gained. But the most important number was 0. 0 times the Mongol Empire would attempt to invade Japan again. The samurai had proven that overwhelming numbers, superior technology, and inevitable destiny could be defeated by intelligent adaptation, strategic defense, and perhaps a little divine wind. They had saved Japan not through stubborn tradition, but by abandoning it when necessary. Not through individual heroics but collective sacrifice. Not through honor but through pragmatism. In doing so, 10,000 warriors had changed the course of world history, proving that empires, no matter how mighty, could still be stopped at the water's edge.